My name is Jeffrey Gleason. I'm a fourth year computer science PhD candidate at Northeastern. And this is...
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is AJ Lintaman. I am a data scientist / data engineer with the National Internet Observatory, as well as the IDI, the Internet Democracy Initiative here in Northeast.
And today we're going to give you an introduction to the National Internet Observatory. So what is the National Internet Observatory? Well, it's an NSF-funded project hosted at Northeastern with the goal of collecting rich online behavioral data and survey data from a large panel of consenting participants. And a big motivation for this project is the retreat of other data sources through platforms. The Twitter API becoming prohibitively expensive, Reddit restricting access, limited availability to other platform data. So this is trying to be an alternative model to provide data by and for academic research. The kinds of behavioral data we're collecting include both where people go online, what they engage with, but also what different platforms algorithmically curate for them in their feeds, search results, LLM responses. And importantly, we're storing all of this intimate information in a secure computing environment and limiting the way academic researchers can access that data with the goal of making it available, but also protecting the privacy of the participants in the panel. Okay, so a few exciting aspects of the data collection of this project that I want to highlight. First, a lot of the data we're collecting is about what people see online, like what they are exposed to or consume in their feeds and in search results. And I think that's a big contrast even to the platform research APIs that exist today, which are often the data they make available is like posts. What people produced on the platform and maybe some aggregate engagement statistics, but not this individual level exposure. We're also collecting like the full view of someone's online experience. So it goes across many different platforms for a specific individual, which I think is really important. Like this is an off-cited limitation in previous academic research, is like this project only had a siloed view into one platform. So this kind of addresses that limitation and also opens up other research questions you could address by looking cross-platform at someone's full experience. Related to this, we are trying to make it easy for researchers to link the survey data that we're collecting about people with their behavioral data. It can be used to validate each other or again to open up new research questions. This is by and for academic researchers, which is really important. It means that your research program doesn't depend on the continued generosity or openness of a platform. This data is collected independently, and the goal is to make it open to academic researchers. And then also in contrast to a lot of platform research programs, we have real genuine care about informed consent and the privacy of the participants that we're collecting data from. But of course, there are also some big challenges. And I think one that we've been thinking a lot about is, although we're working really hard to make the panel representative along a number of different demographic dimensions, there is still selection in the people who are agreeing to install one of our browser extension or mobile apps, and how their behavior could differ systematically. So we're still thinking about how to measure and quantify this. Okay. And before we get into some of the more specific details about like what data we're collecting and some early exploratory analyses, I'll just give a high-level view of kind of the data collection to data access approach. So participants install one of our clients, which could be a browser extension, or an Android app, or an iOS app. They go through a robust informed consent process. Once they've agreed to participate, those clients start sending data to our backend servers. On the back end, we then process that raw stream of information into more structured data sets that researchers can access. And then researchers can apply to access these structured data sets and analyze them, combine them in different ways, and then eventually export summary information about them. And we have a lot of technical and legal, contractual plans in place to restrict the ability to just exfiltrate like the most intimate information, the most like unprocessed information, including like data use agreements and stuff like this. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to AJ to talk about some sample size panel specifics.
All right, welcome in to everyone who was filing in. Again, my name is AJ Ilantaman, for anyone who did not hear that earlier. I am a data scientist / data engineer with the National Internet Observatory. So to give you guys just a quick kind of breakdown of what's going on right now. So again, the National Internet Observatory, the major goal is to really collect data that at this point isn't easily accessible for independent researchers in particular. And however that data flows after it reaches the researchers is very, it's variable. But the goal truly is to get data in the hands of people who can use it, productively. As Jeffrey said, that process has become more difficult over the years. With Twitter and certain social media sites, making this data very limited. So for us, we want to have a sample size of data that is very effective for people to be able to use. So this agenda started 3 years ago. The goal was really to get to a point where we can have 6,000 active users. And as you can see, all of this information is from this year. You'll see that in June, we started to see a huge spike in users. We actually over-recruited in August and September for just some experimental purposes. And the goal is once again to kind of stabilize usership at 6,000. So at this point, we're able to break down our users by certain demographics. Here's just an example of political affiliation as far as representation. So you can see we have different categories that we've collected, from the users on how they identify politically. You see we have extremely liberal, conservative, extremely conservative, and everything kind of in between, in the middle of that spectrum. We also are able to break down usership through other, demographics. So that's just one example for you. I'm going to pass it back over to Jeffrey now to talk more about data collection.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm going to give some more specifics on the different data types that we're collecting, maybe prompt ideas about research questions the National Internet Observatory data could answer. So first, when participants agree to participate in this study, they answer a number of survey questions about demographics, media attitudes towards institutions, and importantly, some of these survey questions are repeated at multiple different waves. For example, the mental health survey, which is powering a research collaboration with MGH currently. And then also the plan in the future is for research groups to be able to submit their own survey questions relevant to their research projects. So the second big category of data is desktop browser data collected from our browser extension on Chrome browsers. That collects, first and foremost, detailed browsing activity, like page navigation, tab transitions, that allow you to reconstruct somebody's trajectory across the internet. And we also collect events about attention on different sites. This, we infer whether somebody was actively engaging with the page based on media playback or mouse keyboard input. Second big type of desktop browser data are HTML snapshots. So here we download the HTML from important platforms like Google or ChatGPT, and then parse that raw HTML data into structured data frames to make available to researchers. Finally, I'll comment on the last kind of category of data collected, which is from mobile applications. So that's an Android application and an iOS application. And we're collecting app usage data, so recording each app, how long it's in the foreground, how many times it was launched. And AJ will share some analyses based on mobile data in a couple minutes. We're also collecting network data, so which IPs different apps are talking to, which is important for privacy research. And working on starting to collect actual content shown in the feed on mobile apps, which is more technically challenging. So this slide has a little bit of information about the prospective access process for researchers. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly so we have time to look at the initial analyses. But the researcher application process will include a code of conduct that researchers agree to, an application where you justify like the level of access you're requesting, like which data sets and how aggregated or disaggregated you need them, and then a data use agreement between the researcher's institution and Northeastern. So yeah, that's the preliminary application process. And now here are a few initial appetizers for data analysis.
All right, now here's the exciting part. So for me personally, so Neo NIO, we again are new, pretty new. But what's even more new is the data science team. So I've been on board now for a month, as well as the other data scientists who have come on board. And what we've been able to do in the short amount of time with the data that we have access to at this point is just make some very early, analytical observations. So here we have app usage broken down by top apps that are used in the dataset. So how we determine this is any application that is present in the foreground of a mobile device for any given amount of time, it qualifies you for app usage on this chart. So you can see there's some things that you would expect here, Chrome being one, settings, obviously people use that a lot on their phones. You can also see social media apps here, some gaming, Candy Crush Soda, and things of that nature. Here we have user participation per capita statewide in the US. Do we have a question?
No, it's 1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay, so I'll rapidly go through this. So this heat map is pretty balanced, as you can see somewhat. So that's something there for you. This here breaks down social media usage across age groups between the ages 18 to 29, 30 to 49, 50 to 64, and so on and so forth. You can see some of the most popular apps in these age groups based off of data that we have collected and analyzed. Here we also have daily average minutes on app per social media app here, also by political affiliation. So this starts to get into some of the really creative and innovative things that we can do as far as joining demographics with raw data that we've collected and creating a lot of inferences, observations, and data frames for researchers. This is kind of more of the same here. average daily social media at foreground time. And yeah, so now we're ready for any questions. I don't think we have too much time left, but if there are any, feel free to go ahead and fire away.
So we're going to do the questions at the end, like we've been doing for the other sessions. So if you make a note to yourself about the question you have, okay?
Okay, hi everybody. Hello. I'm Brooke Williams. I'm an associate professor of the practice of computational journalism. It's a mouthful at BU. And I'm really excited because my co-professor is actually able to be here. Langdon White, let you introduce.
Hi, I'm Langdon White. I'm what's called a clinical professor, also at BU, but in the Faculty of Computing and Data Sciences, and I'm also the technical director for our experiential learning program called Spark. And I'm very excited to be teaching this class with Brooke this semester. Did it about 1.5 years ago, once before, and it looks like the spring too, so that'll be fun.
Forever.
Yes.
Yes, not going anywhere. Okay, so I'm also a long-time investigative reporter who used data as a backbone of stories. So I've used data to, in journalism, to go from the anecdotal, from they said, she said, to looking at the whole system and looking at flaws like systemically throughout systems, and using a database as a backbone and then reporting to tell the narrative stories. And Langdon, asked him about his career. He's kind of famous. Okay. The Justice Media Computational Journalism Collab, it started as an idea to kind of put a fence around something that was already happening. So the director of Spark and I I've been calling all the time, hey, can you scrape this website, or could the students do this computationally very difficult thing to help journalists, right, student journalists. And we were doing a lot of that, and we realized there was room for real collaboration there. BU has this thing that enables us to sort of do this kind of thing, kind of fund us and give us access to library resources. And then also Spark, which Langdon mentioned, and then I'm with the College of Communication, and the Center for Data and Computing Sciences is that giant looking building. Okay.
It's a stack of books, to be clear.
It's a stack of books. It's a class, but it's become a newsroom, and it's not just for news. So it's also for building tools. So we also have 2 students in the room who are currently in the class who could talk about building a tool, and I have a couple examples. And we had the most students we've ever let in is 30, I think. And usually, some teams are good for 2. Usually it's up to 6. Langdon and I teach. We have a whole system, and we've actually published about 25 data-driven investigations with news partners, which is wild. It's in the summer and all of the semesters basically, and we have plans to kind of expand it. I have dreams of this being a program itself, a track, a computational journalism track. Okay, so this is actually really needed, and sort of the reason behind all of this is because I think that we can all appreciate the importance of the news media, and we can all appreciate that news media needs help. And so there's a lot we can do to help the news media with anti-racism efforts, with so many different things. Different tools for freedom of information, public information, retrieval, stuff like that. So we've partnered with a bunch of different types of news orgs, from big nonprofit like ProPublica to the Emancipator is a nonprofit at BU. And the Bay State Banner is the longest local newspaper. And it's the Black Code newspaper. It's in the 18 something. Yeah, it was started a really long time ago. But it's a Black Code newspaper. And so that was one of the initial partners of this initiative. So what we're trying to do is help small nonprofit small newsrooms around with justice focused stories. and also justice-focused newsrooms. So the GRIO is like Black-owned also publication nationally.
I just wanted to add, so the experiential learning program, this SPARK program, right, tends to be very focused on kind of social justice issues in general. What's kind of, I think, really awesome about it is that most of the students who kind of are in it tend to be tech students, right? And they're like, I don't want to go work on a project for Pfizer, they can just pay me. Right? Instead, they want to work on things that are for social justice. So we tend to try to find projects for like nonprofits and municipal organizations or whatever. But then in kind of the news side of it, we tend to favor stories that are also about social justice. So it makes it a really good pairing for the kinds of work that students want to do and some positive impact on society.
Yes. Yep. I don't know about the Department of Corrections. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, it is really cool, and we'll get into that a bit. So, okay, just a few examples. For the Emancipator, we did a story about extreme heat and looked at like kind of what you'd expect, but nobody had really done in Boston, outside of like scientists and. So we looked at like tree canopy and the red lighting borders and like the hottest. Anyone guess like the hottest? The place that was expected right now the hottest and expected to get more hot more quickly, and like suffering the most from heat, like with people going to the hospital and yeah, specifically.
Where we are right now.
It literally was like Massachusetts and Minneapolis. Literally, we all kind of like stepped back from the computer and we're like, that actually is the worst. Yeah, it was wild. So, and then this is the kind of thing where journalists we typically just do this by hand. We just like go through all the judges, right? And Andrew is here. I will just say is a student and who was in the class and has a byline on the story. It's really cool. And typically we go through one by one and just like try to figure it out, right? But there's a lot of more efficient ways to do that, as you all know, and ways that I don't even know about yet, right? And the students, I learn a lot from the CS students, right? From the data and computing students, a ton. I mean, a ton, and also from LinkedIn.
I was also going to add that, but the tech students do too, right? So a lot of people don't even realize that most databases, for example, now support JSON. So this particular story is based on a data set that we have about cases, but most of them are stored as JSON blocks. And so actually knowing how to query the JSON blocks, they barely know SQL half the time. Having them understand that there's actually JSON blocks within the data that then they have to then use JSON parsing. So I personally think it's really good computationally as well.
Yeah, what he said, for sure. And I will say, it was a hard learning curve for me to not be able to be like, oh, just group by that. They're like, what? And I'm like, no, just group, sorry. They really don't know SQL. And that was where my learning, I still use SQL. I don't know Python. Okay. The students, I think the students thought of this. For instance, CBS or NBC, one of our local stations, CBS, wanted to look into gender equity because the state had come out with, they call it see-through, because they're so transparent. They came out with the salaries of all the state employees, right? And they had names. And wouldn't it be cool if we could look at gender equity, right? See if there's a pay gap. But there was no gender. And so they looked into it and someone said, well, what if we assign gender? I've heard about this happening. And at first, the reaction is, oh, we couldn't do that. No way. But it actually turns out we could. And we did it with enough accuracy that the university recognized our data was correct and that it was accurate. It was using self-reported U.S. Census data and then checked against self-reported Olympic athlete data and stuff like that, basically.
Just there's a machine learning, basically there's a model that's been developed that was trained on those tools to recognize the names and assign genders. I think the most important here from a technical perspective is, no, it's not perfect, but we can report its accuracy, right? And so we can say, this is how good the quality of the data we have is.
And then what we choose to focus on, we brought this to the Globe. And I'll say it was it was a hard sell with editors. I don't know if there's a Globe editor here, but there was a certain Globe editor that was very eager to do stories, that might be overlooked. Yeah. And I think we're good. Oh, we should leave questions. We should go on. Anyway, we could choose what to focus on, right? And focus on things that people aren't really looking at. For instance, prisoner grievances. Who's looking at that, right? And then more complex issues, looking at disparities in police arrests. That's really complex. That's hard. That's the kind of thing where you sit down with a data scientist as a journalist and try to do it, right? And so we're able to do these things in a classroom setting, which is really awesome. And then if you've met Nick and Assad, they're in the room here. They are around to talk about this project, and they're students in Justice Media and in Spark. And they basically built a system for news organizations to detect potential racism or bias in stories and coverage and the way things are covered. So basically looking at where stories are, what they are about, what communities they're about, and what communities they come out of, and what the stories are about. Are they all about crime in Roxbury, or are they profiles in Back Bay? What are we talking about? Looking at different patterns.
We don't actually have to wait for questions, so we can keep going.
But
I was just going to add is that one of the things I thought was really interesting that they just mentioned to me earlier is that you will have a story, say, about Beacon Hill, right, about some law that passed, right? But then we can also start to show, well, how many people did you interview in Roxbury about the impact that law is going to have, right? And so it's kind of, there's a secondary, I come from FS, but secondary derivative stuff that happens, right? So, it's really interesting if you start to really play into it.
Yeah, and I mean, this is real change, As a journalist, I don't know how many people are journalists in the room, but it's really hard sometimes to have actual real impact. And, even some of the most celebrated stories, the front page, glorious stories, nothing ever happens sometimes. And this is really cool, real impact, and it's student driven. It's really cool. Okay, so some things we're thinking about is we are in a unique position to do this kind of big work, so we should do big things. And that kind of means this doesn't fit into a semester thing, structure perhaps. What we've created is a newsroom. So how do we make that academic and work for students and learning outcomes and stuff like that? And then we've learned that student journalism is awesome, and it is a solution to lots of problems. And yeah. So with Spark, we're in a unique position that we have a lot of support, a lot of project managers and technical experts, and not Langdon, but people who are similar to his expertise. And so that's really helpful. And then we found it's really helpful to turn down the stories where the news org will come to us and say hey, can you look at parking tickets? And we're I don't see the I'm not sure no matter what we found that it would ever be justice focused. So we're no, we can't. And just sort of well, how about we look at this instead? And then we're gonna do something bigger. We already are offering a second semester option because the students end up wanting to work on this for 3-4 semesters, right? ProPublica took a really long time. I think it was 18 months or something. Anyway, and then, we build trust with the smaller newsrooms. It can be hard, when you're approaching the GRIO or the news organizations that I've never worked with before that where they don't know me or they don't know any of us, we have to build trust. And I think that's key, honestly, because ultimately we have to publish what we're doing, or in the case of the racism tool, we have to get the newsrooms to adopt the tools that we're building. In that case, GBH is actually partnering, I hope I can say that, with them on that. So it's really important to build the trust to be able to execute all this and publish it.
And I was just gonna, from the experiential learning perspective, like we have a hard and fast rule that anything that is being done in the experiential learning program, there has to be an output that is quote unquote public. Like it could still be private, but the idea is that you're not just writing code for the sake of writing code, you have to deliver it. And so that is a requirement of all these courses. So we have to find ways, sometimes in these stories, especially like multi-semester ones, like how do we have interim deliverables where the team is actually delivering something?
Thank you. Thank you.
So how many folks in the room identify as a teacher? This means you either you're a professor, you might be an educator, you might be a TA, you might teach interns in your own newsroom. In any capacity, you train people, right? Okay, so if that's you, then this club is for you. We are the Data Journalism Teachers Club. This is the story of starts out with three friends. We met at NICAR. There were three of us who got our first professor jobs. So we were in newsrooms and we got plucked in from our newsrooms and plopped into a classroom. And we all met at NICAR and we're like, how does this work, right? And we've all been in classrooms before, so we decided, we're gonna, we consulted people at NICAR, people were really friendly, other professors said, this is how I do it. We got a lot of advice. Some of us got sent to our centers for teaching and learning, which we found very unhelpful, in part because they don't have the journalism context. So they can provide some guidance of like, oh, these are some good teaching tools, but we found them largely unhelpful at our respective institutions.
I was going to also say we thought we were okay journalists, pretty good journalists enough to be in the classroom teaching those things. Some of us data scientists, computational folks, but when it came to rubrics, lesson plans, syllabi, anything in between, that's not what we went to school for or even did actively day to day. Some of us adjuncted before, but I think when Dhrumil and I met, we were like hands up in the air, like what are we going to do, right?
Yeah. So we decided to just start a weekly reading group. It was the three of us. We would meet online every week. We would discuss what we'd read about pedagogy. We found some papers, just sort of thinking through how workshopping our individual classes, whatever. It was just three friends hanging out on a Zoom call once a week to talk about how we're tackling teaching. But as we were sort of working on this, we came to the realization, even after we'd taught a semester or two, we were getting pretty good reviews. There were students seemed to like us. People were like, "You're doing a great job," pat us on the back. But we didn't feel convinced. We were like, as data people, we're like, by what metric? Like, where is the metric that tells us that exactly how much our students have learned? And we felt that we weren't approaching teaching with the same kind of rigor as we approach journalism. And so we wrote a piece in Source, and this was kind of captured some of the sentiment of what we what we came to. We said a good data journalist is a careful and methodical purveyor of information. We take great pains to ensure that we've met the burden of proof to write each and every sentence, back up every single assertion. But how do we back up the assertion that we're practicing good data journalism teaching methods? How do we know that we've taught well, not just be sort of told that we're teaching well or feel that we're teaching well, right? And it was with that gnawing question in mind that we started the Data Journalism Teachers Club. So as this sort of continued, we decided to open this up to other folks. And so you can go to datajournalismteachers.club and sign up. And we're a community of professors, teachers, trainers, and everyone in between thinking about effective and thoughtful ways to teach data skills. Meanwhile, I also have been adjuncting at the Harvard Kennedy School for a while. Aarushi and I now teach that class together. And what we found when we went to their Center for Teaching and Learning was 7 people whose only job was to teach people how to effectively think about pedagogy in the context of policy. And we didn't have that at our respective journalism schools, and we thought if we band together, then maybe we can have something like this for all of the data journalism professors across various institutions, professors, teachers, trainers across various institutions. So of the people who said they were teachers, raise your hand again if you teach in any capacity. Have you heard of backwards design? Keep your hand up if you've heard of backwards design. Okay, we were also surprised that so we started out going, all right, so if we're not getting any kind of formal teacher training, what do high school teachers learn when they start teaching high school? And we decided to start teaching ourselves whatever it is that high school teachers learn, and this seemed to be one of the fundamental things, like some kind of framework by which you design a class and think about student progress. So I'll pass it on to Aarushi to talk about what we've been doing since we've stopped being a Zoom chat of three people just complaining, and yeah.
Okay. So we decided to go off this high school module. So I teach at American University. I had data journalism there. Dhrumil teaches at the Columbia Journalism School. And so we got, like, from that small crew and surveying the folks that joined, we went to that high school model and we're like, okay, we should call someone who's actually a teaching and learning expert who's studied this and maybe also was a former high school teacher. So Dr. Nita Sudrani, she's at Northwestern, she's a pedagogy and like curriculum expert. We invited her to do and math, yeah, and now former high school math teacher. And we invited her to do a 3-part series on some questions that we experienced when we first came into the classroom, right? How do we design a very thoughtful activity? Or maybe how do you build a better syllabus? For those of you that have taught or been teaching fellows or anything, oftentimes in journalism, we are handed a syllabus that someone else maybe taught from a previous class. I was one of the first, to teach some of my new classes, so I really didn't know what I was going to do in terms of building a syllabus with course outcomes, modules, everything in between. So we did this 3-part series, and it was really awesome. I think our Zoom calls were very packed. And mind you, these were like 2.5-hour Zoom calls that people were conversing and talking, so it was a really cool experience.
And the 3 parts were based on the backwards design triangle. So this triangle, you start out, it's actually very similar to test-driven development if you're a coder, where you first define what the outcome is that you want, then you define how you're going to measure that outcome, and only then do you begin coding, or in this case, like designing the actual activity in the class. So that was sort of the way that we did the Teacher School 101 series. Yeah.
It was also important to break down backwards design to a very applied field. So when we broke them down into 3 different sessions and used actual data journalism activities and context, like from our classes, from everyone's classes, I was like, okay, wait, I'm kind of digging this backwards design thing. I wasn't sold initially, but now I am. Then we also invited Eva Constantaras, who's like an internationally renowned data journalism trainer. She primarily trains a lot of international newsrooms that have maybe lower access to materials. And she has this thing called the master file, which is anyone's not read it, you should totally go. It's public access, like it's brilliant. And so we had her come talk as a trainer and talk through the process that she goes through when she trains someone to do a data-driven investigation, which you can actually break down to something similar to the scientific method, like Julia was talking about. And we did a whole series we did a whole session on this, and this was pretty.
Yeah, can I add something?
Yeah.
So the interesting thing about this one was, Ava's developed the master file over the course of like more than a decade. She's a really, really expert teacher. She didn't use those backwards design words, but everything in there was very clearly backwards design. And so one of the things we realized as we brought Ava in was some of the stuff that we're reading about pedagogy is not in the journalism context, and we have to do a lot of extra work to kind of bring it into our context and go, how does this apply to our class? So it's really easy to look at it and dismiss it and go like, yeah, that's really not for us. We do more like applied work, like our students are creating pieces. They're not, this is for undergrad work or this is for high school students, whatever. But this really helped us figure out like, okay, this actually does apply to us. We just have to do the additional work of bringing it into our context.
And what I've learned also is pedagogy is just rooted not just in the science of teaching and learning, but in this internal thing that a lot of teachers have where you just want to be better teachers, right? You really just want to be the best that you can be for your students and understand how to adapt those things. So once I realized that, we were able to do a lot more. This was actually all of Dhrumil's idea, but I'll talk about it because I talk better about him than he talks about himself. So he planned an awesome scavenger hunt at NICAR this past year where we literally wore these t-shirts, and his students wore these t-shirts. Actually, do you just want to talk about the process?
Sure, yeah. So a lot of, we teach concepts like regression analysis, for example, in classes, but like when you read an article, it doesn't always say we used regression analysis to frame whatever. And so we figured we'd just have students wander around NICAR with t-shirts that say like, tell me about your linear regressions, or like, tell me about your p-values, and identify case studies in that way. We're also taking all of that stuff, compiling it into like a list of things that other teachers can use to teach. So like we can refresh our cases every year as well and have up-to-date bank of articles that can be used to teach certain concepts.
Yeah, and we're building that syllabi bank too to share with other new teachers as well. And in terms of this, we are now, because a lot of professors and teachers and instructors are tackled oftentimes we're looked at in the J school to like tackle these big problems such as artificial intelligence, or I don't know how many times I've been asked what to do about ChatGPT from other faculty members, right? So we started thinking about how we could program around this and basically come together and talk about principles and policies and the right way to teach and design effective programs. Did you want to add?
Yeah. So one of the things that, so this came on the next slide. So we decided to have a book club. The Harvard Kennedy School folks, again, they had I was attending one of their sessions and they had recommended this book called Cheating Lessons, and it's written well before ChatGPT ever came out. In the data context, we're often using it for coding and all, making maps and all sorts of things, but other faculty members in our school were just very, very concerned about cheating. And this book helps to, it was written well before ChatGPT ever released, but it really gets into the reasons why students cheat in the first place, right? So like, why do they even feel the need to do this? Well, in general, I highlight when you create a high stakes learning environment, when they don't feel like they can achieve the thing by any other means, or when there's not that intrinsic motivation to do something. And so this book was kind of the right book for the right moment, but it was recommended by the folks at Slate. So again, I was like, we should really have something like this with pedagogy experts sort of helping us navigate the current moment within the journalism context. And so, so we had a book club. It was wonderful. We had some great discussions. We got past the kind of cliche stuff around ChatGPT very quickly, and we got very into the meat and potatoes of like, how do we think about this in the context of our own classes, keeping in mind these sort of time-tested pedagogical principles that come from research Yeah,
I was just gonna go to the last slide
please.
and talk about, so now you've heard our pitch about the club, but it's not just 3 people, we have 108 members. And that also includes folks that don't even identify as data journalism professors. I think or instructors or teachers or whatever it is that you do, or you help someone with their code on a computer. We have film professors, we have that come journalism professors, anything in between where you want a community on how to teach, maybe rooted in pedagogy in a field maybe where we weren't talking about those things. So it's been kind of incredible to be able to grow this. And we grew fully online, we're fully online, and now we're just moving forward and designing more events.
So all our events are either online or at one of these conferences. You'll notice here we have a monthly newsletter, so please do sign up. It's datajournalismteachers.club. You'll also notice all of these past events over here, and we have no upcoming events. That's because we're at a place where we want to hear from you. We want to know what it is that people actually need. We still have our weekly. We meet weekly on Zoom still and like chat and complain and stuff. But we're sort of really thinking through what is it that the community wants and needs. And so how many people have attended a Teachers Club event here, by the way? Yeah, awesome. We're looking forward to having you join. So please visit datajournalismteachers.club. We're very proud of our URL, and we hope to see you there.
It is a real club, I told you.
Yeah.
Very real club.
Hi, thank you all for such great presentations. I really appreciate it. I have a question for, I guess, y'all teaching the course at Northeastern. I know you talked a lot about how you do outreach to local nonprofits and the importance of building trust with local newsrooms so that you can really do that impactful work, especially when it's coming from students, which I think is really valuable. I was wondering if you could go or talk a little bit more about what you do specifically to build trust. Is that coming from y'all as professors or like student up?
A lot of it is a personal relationship with an editor. And then a structure,
Imagine it like Spark in general is more like a consulting company, right? The relationships are at the executive level, right? Like you have the people who are leading the organization, building relationships with clients, right? And in the Justice Media case, Brooke is largely that, where she is building relationships with the executives at these news organizations. So it's the same kind of thing. The students will sometimes also build relationships once they kind of involve themselves in projects. We've had students who went on to get hired by those various news organizations, for example. Unlike a consultancy, we want them to go away, right? So I'm just kind of add to that. And then, of course, I also just want to point out my laptop. Boston University.
Thank you. And good correction, language. Brooke is a very proud Northeastern alum too, but we're very happy that she's doing everything she's doing. It's very confusing, actually. We're very proud. But BU deserves all the credit for that amazing project you guys are building. This is a question as a data journalism teacher and instructor. I'm sorry I haven't plugged into what you guys are doing. I'm sort of off in other place, but I'm always puzzled by how we connect, these undergrads who just recently were doing linear algebra and differential equations. They're taking calculus and trig, and I give them like the NICAR course pack, and they're writing like it's simple equations. It's like this is child's play math, and they're kind of confused. It's almost like everything we taught them K through 12 in our system sort of dissipates. And you're like, are you really not that math literate, but you just got a 4 on your AP calculus test like not more than 18 months ago? And so there's some gap there. And I know a lot of people come into journalism and are like, I'm not mathy, and like, but I think this would apply to both these groups. Sorry to exclude NIL, we'll get there, but what do we do about that, and how do we think about how they're coming in contextually and why that gap exists?
I'll just validate that first, that it's something that we're universally seeing, especially it's like my third year at AU now, and we're seeing that, but we're no experts in that, which is why actually I'm just going to refer you to Dr. Sundrani's recordings. Like we have all three, like we have those up, and she talks about how to navigate that, design assignments to make sure we're pacing properly. I learned a lot about how I can try to combat that. So they're on the website.
Yeah, I mostly teach graduate students kind of from all over the world, so it's slightly different. But yeah, I mean, I think this is exactly why we started the club, right? Because we'll say things like this at conferences, and then it'll just kind of vanish into the ether. And so we want to bring in pedagogy experts to help us figure out exactly what's going on.
So I would add a couple things. One, I also teach a lot of software engineering type stuff, and master's students are much better. But on top of that, I would just kind of also add, let me clarify your question. Were you talking about more from kind of the journalism side, or are you talking about the data side? Like, are you talking about people who are coming up through software engineering or data science, or are you talking about journalism? Okay, so I mean, I go back to, this is also that classic fear of math problem, right? It's like, yeah, they made it through the minimum math they could, right, to get out of high school. But then there's this, inherent kind of fear of math that I think is hugely problematic. And, I would say I see this less just because I have a bunch of nerds who want, to do that kind of stuff. But even in software, right, like, I did a computer science undergrad degree, and then I worked mostly in industry. It's 15 years in consulting or something, and never used math again, right? Like, I think it's kind of a misnomer. Like, it's good for like understanding the context, just like you learn it in high school, but it's not necessarily a requirement of the role. So I think it goes back to what your point was, is that if you can build assignments that kind of show what it is. I used to joke about one of my teachers trying to get somebody who taught me. They should add to their calc course, if you're going on the highway at 90 miles an hour and you see a cop and their acceleration is whatever, can you get to the next exit before they catch you, right? Like make it real, right? Yeah.
Really fast.
Yeah.
So when I teach data journalism, like the first thing I have when I walk in the room is a bit from the newspaper that's like a dump that was a piece of land that was meant to be a public library or public park, and it was a dump, and there's like toilets, and I'm like, when you think of data journalism, think of the toilets on this land. Like, don't think of numbers, don't think of math, that's not what it's about. Because math and numbers like led us there, sure. Like, and not that much math, honestly. But it led us there, but that's not what we're doing here at all. Yeah.
And I think the other thing is, like, a lot of the K through 12 stuff. I mean, having Anita in these calls was great, because she was like, it's not great in K through 12 land either. Like, it's not like we've got it all figured out. I think one of the things is, especially with math, sometimes they're taught calculations, but not necessarily the way to logic and apply that. And so it's like, maybe they do have that calculation background. One example is when I teach, I have a class called algorithms, and we get into linear regressions, and so they each have a story where it's like, okay, I want to see why this hospital has such a high rate of complications relative to other hospitals, right? So students go and try to explain the variance, and then they're like, they might go and do some reporting, and they're like, oh, that's actually because it's a level 1 trauma center, and like they actually just get more complicated cases. And they come back to me and they're like, that was pretty boring. Like, and then we'll go, okay, fine. Now let's take that concept that you just learned from your reporting, and let's like make that another X in your regression analysis, right? So like now let's add that to your model, and then rerun your model, figure out what the next residual is, and go back out in the world and figure. So like connecting that the logic of y tilde x1 x2 to a real exercise where you have to like go step outside and learn something can really help as well. And it's not, I don't think that's something they're doing in high schools, right? So that maybe that's part of it.
All right, big round of applause. Thank you everybody, thanks to our speakers. We're wrapping up for the day. Feel free to hang out a little bit, chat, chill, enjoy Boston Northeastern. Thank you all for coming. It was lovely having you all. Have a nice trip home.